Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the Slingshot from levees.org. I am so excited about the show we have today. We're going to be talking about the advocate and the levee failures and how those are related. You all know me, Sandy Rosenthal, and also joining me today is Mr. Rudy Vorkapic. Mr. Rudy Vorkapic, originally from Chicago, came to New Orleans the year prior to Katrina. He founded and produced the satirical newspaper, The Levee, with its motto, "We hold nothing back." The Levee was the first newspaper to call out the Army Corps of Engineers for being responsible for the levee failures. Also joining us today is Miss Sandy Parker. Sandy Parker is a New Orleans filmmaker and a real estate agent who was inspired to move back to the area from Chicago after Hurricane Katrina. She's been a marching member of Crew de Vue for over a decade, and she recently renovated a home in Broadmoor where she lived with her ragamuffin cat, the ragdoll Persian mix named Hazel.
I can arrange that, definitely.
Okay, well,
By the way, I have to correct you. I did not move back from Chicago. I moved back from Portland, Oregon.
I don't know why I said Chicago. Did I say Chicago?
Yeah,
Looking
but
right at the word
I
Oregon.
was born in South Bend, Indiana, so that was near
Well, Chicago.
Thank goodness for editing. I was looking right at the word Portland. That's just incredible. Thank you for pointing that out. And we all need to have where we came from. And by the way, I'm from Massachusetts. So we're
No
all
way.
country. And here we all are in New Orleans. And I know I will never leave. How about you all?
I have no plans.
No.
I want to move to Italy. I've been wanting to move to Italy for the longest time, and in a few years I'll do it. I'm still learning Italian.
Resilient, which is a word I hate, actually. The word I like using for us down here is stubborn. Forget about resilient. Is that anybody can be resilient. We're stuck here. We're planted. We're stubborn.
I think you're right. It's a fancy word for stubborn.
Let's boil it down to the truth.
When you move to Italy, I want to come visit you there.
Oh, yes. I fully expect a lot of guests. I need to buy a hotel. Just everyone can come and stay.
Oh, that sounds great. Something out of the White Lotus.
Yeah, or the New Marigold Hotel.
The word you'll ever use in Italian, I think, is the word prego or prego, which multi-use. It can be pretty much anything. It could be thank you, you're welcome,
Thank you,
yes, I agree.
I thought toiletta would be better, but
yeah, we've got one of those in Chicago, but it's a kind of a profane word, and you can use it almost as a profanity, as a greeting, as a salutation. It's fun.
Oh, you're not going to tell us what it is?
It's the word jagoff. It makes no sense. It's a Chicago favorite. If you know a Chicagoan and he says that to you, it either means he loves you or he's going to take you out.
That's a now all-purpose word.
There you go.
Okay, we have a lot to talk about today. We'll start today's episode talking about something I really thought I would never see. An editor at what used to be called the New Orleans Times-Picayune and now the Advocate was rude and disparaging toward a subscriber who was also a flood survivor. Her name is Ms. Kathy Hightower. All she was doing is pointing out an error in a recent local Advocate story that mentioned the flooding during Katrina and used the phrase, "Katrina devastated New Orleans." Ms. Hightower took issue with that and wrote to the editor and said, no, it wasn't the flooding of Katrina, it was engineering failure. And in response to that, the op-ed editor put in writing, okay, I never thought I'd see the day, and responded to Ms. Hightower that yes, our news bureau does know what happened and what we're using is Katrina shorthand. She didn't stop there. She went on to say that, when we give a weather report, we don't explain why the sky is blue. So I don't know how you can be more condescending than to speak to not only a subscriber, but a flood survivor. This particular flood survivor's father died in the flooding of a heart attack. So there you have it. Wow. And the response of levees.org was to create a rally starter petition and invite of supporters to send a letter to the top editor of The Advocate, asking him to issue a memo to all their reporters and have them stop using Katrina shorthand. So with that introduction, would anyone like to jump in? How about you, Rudy?
Something like that. Look, This new editor, Renee Sanchez, he's been there about 3 years. He follows up a guy who took us through Katrina, Peter Kovacs, a pure newsman, if there ever was a newsman. We have to remember something about the Times-Picayune and a lot of newspapers, but the Times-Picayune was only a good newspaper for a span of about 20 years. When the Newhouses owned it, the family before John George, when they owned it, they really invested in quality journalism. They decided to make this paper a flagship newspaper because they bought newspapers that were the single newspaper in the towns they bought them in. So there was no competition. They really did invest in news. So when Katrina happened, they had excellent reporters and quality editors who did a great job and took us through Katrina. Even after Katrina, like you mentioned, Sandy, I decided to write a satirical newspaper because I was angry at everything that was going on. I got angry at how the federal government was responding, how the local government was responding. So I took on, my goal was to throw the insanity back at those who were throwing it at us. So meeting you, listening to you as a citizen journalist and taking you seriously, I came to the conclusion very quickly that it was the Army Corps of Engineers that had done this. You showed the evidence, the investigative tenacity that no one else had shown, and came to the unmistakable conclusion that it was the Army Corps of Engineers, their poor design and absolute poor upkeep of the entire system, and the neglect of it, and not only the neglect, but the inability to finish it. It had been started after Hurricane Betsy in 1965. They started developing this system. It was funded. As time went on, they never fully funded it. They kept taking funding away from the levee system. So when Katrina happened, it had been almost 40 years, and there had been no system put together, even though it was supposed to be. So when Katrina happened, the Times-Picayune had a stable of veteran reporters who were ready. They did great reporting, from Chris Rose, who, in my opinion, should have won the Pulitzer Prize that year. He finished second, but he was our psyche for a year, the conscience of the city. They did a lot of great reporting, understanding who was to blame, what the federal government was trying to accomplish and not accomplish, how they were trying to bully their way in and take over and do all the wrong things, and how the state and the road home and all these programs that had great intentions. Katrina overwhelmed so many things that there was so much to write about. What I fear right now, and what this letter puts fear in me, is that we're regressing at the Times-Picayune, that we're going back to the days before it was a true news outlet. Renee Sanchez, this editor, wrote a letter to the readers when he was hired in 2022, and he wrote another one to them a year later. One of the things he said in his letter in 2023 was that he was trying to make a commitment to the readers. And he said, and this is a quote, "We want to be the most trusted, in-depth news source on all the subjects people care about." What subject do we care more about than flood protection, than insurance, than these things that are all tied together inextricably? For anyone at that newspaper to give the Army Corps or the government and to go back and try and almost rewrite history is what they're trying to do. The paper of record is seemingly trying to rewrite history. That absolutely scares me. It makes me think that we're going back to a time before the Times-Picayune was interested in news.
And I am enraged that we're in this position having to have this conversation today. I'm really angry. So would this be an okay time for me to step in and follow up with what you're saying? And I'd like to bring in Sandy Parker to comment on this next issue. The levee.org in true form, we like to mobilize the community, and we mobilize the community to write to Sanchez. The last time I checked, Renee Sanchez has received 150 letters. I need to go check, but he received maybe 200. I need to go look. But he's got a lot of letters, all addressed to him, ever since we did this call to action. After doing this call to action, and after Renee Sanchez got all these letters, I don't know what happened over there in their office, but possibly Renee Sanchez asked the op-ed editor to write back some of the commenters. One of the subscribers, her name was Catherine Freeman. Catherine Freeman doesn't live in New Orleans, actually. She lives in Baton Rouge. But you didn't have to live in New Orleans to be affected by the levee failures. You might have had a business in New Orleans and lived in Baton Rouge, and your business went under. Or you might have had family members in New Orleans. Catherine Freeman lived in Baton Rouge, but was still very much affected by the levee failures. This op-ed editor wrote a very interesting email to Ms. Freeman. And in a nutshell, she said to Ms. Freeman, we all know here in our news bureau at The Advocate, we know what happened and everyone knows what happened. So we don't feel we need to repeat it in our news stories. She took it a step further. This is the part, again, I never thought I'd see this. Actually took offense. Some flood survivors are trying to educate the news bureau because they're acting like they don't know what's going on, and took offense and said something along the lines of, we work hard to serve our subscribers and we don't appreciate being educated by our subscribers. I'm phrasing. Anybody that wants to see the actual letter can easily do that, and we'll put that in the show notes. But Sandy, the other Sandy Parker, had some on-point comments about the op-ed editor's remarks to the subscriber. Sandy, I'd like to turn the mic over to you, please.
I read that letter and I just thought, that's just silly. The purpose of the newspaper is to educate the public. I mean, that is the purpose of the newspaper. We're saying that the reporters are not delivering the right information to the readers. I have friends whose children were born around that time and are now of legal age. And I've spent time this weekend with some house guests, one of whom is 21 years old. We were looking at photo albums and she's, oh, look, oh, it's the Twin Towers. And oh, do you guys remember 9/11? History, those of us who were there, who remember the news reports, we're here to bear witness for everybody else. And the more time goes by, the more I appreciate. I used to think there would always be old people in the world. Recently at a funeral, I realized there will always be old people, but they'll be my contemporaries. I won't be looking up to these people who have this historical knowledge. They're going to be gone, and it's just going to be us. My father turns 90 next week. He knows so much. And someday he'll be gone and I won't be able to ask him all the questions. Also, as a filmmaker, data rot is real. If you get rid of your hard copy and the file gets corrupted, you can't access the information anymore. We've also got a federal government where it seems that documentation data is possibly being erased or removed from websites. I think it's the time for all news publications to step it up, not step it back. Somebody has to carry the torch and provide information for people who weren't there, who don't remember, who don't know.
Well said, Sandy. When I saw your comments about what the op-ed editor actually said to a subscriber, I think I'm still in shock, but I love the way you described it so succinctly. We need to be reminded every day. We should be talking about this 100 years from now.
That's right. And always with the same wording, the same intent, the understanding that we fought so hard to achieve, which was the understanding that as the federal government, as the Army Corps of Engineers itself, tried to put the blame on us for the levees failing, when we know through your hard work, through the community's hard work, through a lot of good reporting at the time, that it was the fault of the Army Corps of Engineers. It was bad design, destined to fail. It was just a matter of time.
It was just a matter of time. It might have been the next thunderstorm.
And then also in this letter to the editor from Renee Sanchez, the editor that we're talking about, he wrote this sentence. I quote, "Any newsroom claiming to work in the public interest also needs another bedrock value, humility." That's him. Those are his words. A willingness to listen to all sides.
Rudy, have you heard from Renee?
Transparency.
What happened?
No, I didn't expect to. Of course, if I read my letter, I think you'd be. My letter was a little bit more stark on his face, so I enjoyed my letter myself.
He didn't respond to you?
No, I haven't heard a word.
John Barry, one of the first commissioners in the levee board reform, saw this. He said, "Sandy, I got this. I'm going to send my own letter." And he did. He sent me a copy of it. John Barry is a fabulous writer, and of course it was beautiful work of prose. To my knowledge, Rene Sanchez has not responded to any of these
Anyone.
100 people who
Anyone.
asked him to issue a style guide, just like the Associated Press has done years
Yes.
ago. The Associated Press is an international news source, much bigger than the Advocate, issued a style guide to all of its reporters worldwide. Whenever you talk about the flooding in New Orleans, you need to include levee failure. And then depending on what you're
That's it.
writing about, even get more into it, like why the levees failed and what.
Absolutely.
The Associated Press did this years ago. The Advocate, it's time for you to do the same.
Journalists go by a style guide called the Associated Press Style Book, updated every year by Associated Press, that news outlets use for form and style. And so you can be consistent from one newspaper to the next. And that's basically what we're talking about here. We're talking about being uniform in our explanation and our commitment to the public. And again, this is Rene Sanchez wrote this when he was hired, that a newspaper must show, and this is quote, a willingness to listen to all sides, transparency with readers about our mistakes. He said that. These are his words.
Isn't it interesting that all of this with these letters back and forth with the Advocate preceded the Associated Press being barred from President Trump's press briefings? The Associated Press has always been the gold standard. It's strange that the Advocate doesn't want to set its own bar that high.
It is strange. It boggles my mind. Why is the Advocate clinging to the original narrative? Right after the levees broke, when people hadn't yet been found in their attics, the business community had a plan. They called it levee board reform. This is just 7 weeks after Katrina. The city wasn't dewatered, but they were blaming the levee boards. It was the levee board. They weren't paying attention to flood protection. And the Army Corps of Engineers got a total free pass. 7 weeks after the flooding. It was a time of chaos. We were confused. We were overwhelmed. People woke up every day and worried about 3 things. How am I going to make a living? Where am I going to work? Where am I going to live? And how are my kids going to go to school if you have kids? So we were told, oh, it was the levee boards. And who had the time, effort, and resources to do the research? So that levee board reform got passed. At the time, I called it a distraction from the real culprit, which is the Army Corps of Engineers. But I didn't really have a problem with the levee board reform. As far as I was concerned, it was okay. None of the reforms are harmful in any way and may even be good. But my big problem with it is it distracted the American people and Congress and the president and us locally from the true culprit, which is the Army Corps of Engineers, who misdesigned those levees. In the Army Corps of Engineers' own report, they state clearly the levee did not perform as designed. They were wrongly built, wrongly designed and wrongly built. So there's a newspaper article just yesterday where Governor Landry, Jeff Landry, along with somebody who's representing him, his name's Guidry.
His name's Shane.
Shane Guidry, yes. And they want to come in and they're claiming that levee board reform is full of scammers. The levee board reform is not doing any harm. I'd rather have a blue ribbon committee of experts do this. But our governor wants to come in and just reform the nominating committee, or probably even do away with it altogether. And the only way to do that is to pass a law. And he's going to have a lot of trouble getting the state of Louisiana to change the law. But the bottom line is, I think the governor is going to find out that it's going to be a lot harder than he thinks to make any changes, because the Army Corps of Engineers is in charge of our levees. Nobody can tell the Corps what to do. And that's one of the things that all the levee commissioners found out after the levee board reform. They're going to build whatever it is they want. But again, the reforms were not a bad thing. Any other commentary on that newspaper article yesterday?
We'll never really know what we won't know until we know, which is the mantra for what's happening in America right now. We're not going to know until we know what the Army Corps of Engineers is going to stand up to or what they're not going to stand up to. We don't know what any federal agency is going to stand up to or not stand up to right now. We have no idea what threats they'll knuckle under to. We have no idea what kind of coercion they'll face. And we're in a very susceptible time right now, to say the least. And that harkens back to what we're talking about with the newspaper, why it's so important for them to do what they need to do for these levee boards. They're independent, and they're made up of people who know what they're talking about and are making recommendations. The recommendations that they're making are ones that are benefiting the community, putting a faith in people to be here. It was those reforms of the levee boards that helped people want to invest in the real estate market. I'm sure Sandy can talk to that. It was the faith we started to have in a system that really helped us rebound. And it took a long time, but that was a part of it.
But Rudy, though, the levee board reform, as I said, it caused no harm.
No.
It was not, there was really, the pre-Katrina levee boards did nothing wrong.
Right.
According to the Army Corps, they did nothing wrong.
Right. But they did try to blame them for everything. They tried to put the blame at the hands of those levee boards that they didn't inspect them. And these were jobs of our engineers.
So who tried to blame the levee board?
Army Corps, the federal government, and George Bush.
And the business community.
Yes.
All those business community people, they had their minds made up. It was the levee board, even though there was no evidence to back that up. Absolutely no evidence, but they kept saying it over and over again, and people bought it hook, line, and sinker. So here we are. And it's my
understanding that Mr. Guidry wants to replace the leader of that levee board with the police chief of the levees, who has no experience in levees. The person running it now is an engineer, and you have to remember who Mr. Guidry is. Mr. Guidry is someone who has worked his way up from a towboat operator to a guy who runs all kinds of vessels for the oil and gas industry and the deep water projects. That should tell you a lot about where our governor is headed and what his intent is.
No doubt.
Not what's good for the industry and what's going to benefit him in the long run through donation.
Undoubtedly, it's about money.
Always.
The levee authority controls about $70 million a year. Anybody in the city who turns their tax bill over, you see the number one is the public schools, and another big one is the levee authority. So we pay for the maintenance and operation of our levees. This is about that $70 million a year, and the governor wants a piece of controlling that. So what he's doing is he's claiming that the nominating committee, that's the guys who choose who's going to serve by law, it's one of their people that either designate or one of their own members. Though in my mind, they should have either recused themselves from comment or in transparency said, oh, by the way, you should know that one of my members is on that nominating committee. You see what I'm saying?
Transparency.
I asked the reporter, can you think of anyone I can interview for commentary on this? He did interview me. He didn't include my quotes. I think he didn't like them because I just talked about how the levee board reform was a distraction. And I don't think he wanted to hear that. I said, you're not going to find anybody who can comment on this. This is pretty complex stuff. I did give him the name of one person, Stephen Estopanol, who was an 8-year commissioner on the levee authority post-Katrina. And so the reporter, Alex Lubin, did call Stephen Estopanol. And according to Lubin, it was depressing because according to Estopanol, you can't tell the Corps what to do, which is what I've been saying for 20 years. Nobody tells the Army Corps what to do. And the governor is going to find that out. What the levee board does is spends that $70 million a year maintaining our $16 billion flood protection system, which is extremely expensive to maintain.
Right.
I don't think that they have enough money. I think they have to supplement it with the money that they make off the airport and the marina.
Right, and cookie
That's another
sales.
story for another. That was called corruption 20 years ago, but they made money and it's paid for our levies. But anyway, I've done enough.
And now here's the other thing, not just a local issue. This is everywhere. If there's a local newspaper, it's happening. I have a deep fear of what's happening here is what's happening all over the country with newspapers, is that, and this Rene Sanchez, his actions make me fear this, is that he may be more interested in adding readers than in the news. It used to be that the news brought readers, but now the new thinking is that features, food writing, and better sports coverage is what readers want. And time will tell. The attention span of a normal person is really decreased over my lifespan, that's for sure. And so we'll see. But I have a feeling that's what's happened. I feel that he may have been brought on to help dilute the paper as opposed to pump it up. And I think this is a great example. In my mind, this is what sparked that thought, is that unfortunately that might be what's happening here.
I think that's a valid comment. The only thing I'm going to add is the last line of this article that appeared yesterday. That was a discussion of Landry trying to reform the nominating committee. The final line in the article was, the Flood Protection Authority is doing a great job. How do you know? How do you measure the Flood Protection Authority's work? There is no way to know if they're doing a good job or not. And I've mentioned this before, measure, and that is the Army Corps of Engineers gives a grade to the levee authorities every year for their maintenance and operations. If you don't get a good grade, we could lose our certification of our levees and no one can get insurance. There's one measure and one measure only. Prior to Katrina, every single year, the Army Corps of Engineers gave the Flood Authority a grade of excellent. After Hurricane Katrina and the levee board reform, almost every year, the Army Corps of Engineers has given the grade to the Flood Authority for the maintenance, a grade of ready, minimally acceptable. And then there's acceptable, and then there's excellent. So the one measure that there is of the Flood Authority is in the tank. Now,
maybe they're not used to a grade that high and they're so proud.
How can you go around saying the Flood Authority is doing a great job when it's impossible to measure their work?
I think that's what politics is now. That's what governance is now. It's not actually doing it. It's actually just saying you've done it.
Yeah, I agree. So I've talked way too much today. Sandy, we invited you onto the show because your comments were just so spot on and appropriate, describing what we all saw was reprehensible treatment of an editor at The Advocate, a subscriber who's also a flood survivor. Thank you so much for that. Do you have any advice for The Advocate, Sandy?
Just the facts, ma'am.
Nicely played.
Was it who, what, where, when, how? It's reporting. And there's too much magical thinking in the world right now. And I don't know if you guys remember, but after Katrina, there were some people who said, perhaps this flood was God's punishment for people partying too much in New Orleans, those sinners. No, we have the facts that there was a man-made catastrophe, the levee failure, where everyone was counting on this thing to work and it had not been properly executed. That's facts.
That's fabulous advice. You reminded me of something that Alex Lubin, who wrote this article yesterday, and he supposedly, he's one of several people, more than one person is taking over the job for Mark Schlefstein, the prior environmental writer who recently retired. Several people are trying to fill his shoes. He's one of them. And I just remembered something he said about Stephen Estopanol's commentary. He thought Stephen Estopanol's comments were quote unquote frustrating. And I thought, is it the job of a reporter to call something frustrating? No, his
Probably
job
not.
is the truth and the facts. Yeah. Rudy?
No, what you're supposed to do is write stories in a way that allow the readers to draw their own conclusions and not try and make those conclusions for them. That's editorializing. That's commentary. There's a very big difference. I understand why Sanchez didn't write back to me, because here's one of the things I wrote to him. Now you want to revert back to your pre-journalistic days before the Newhouses actually sparked the TP's only glory days. Get on the stick and do the clear journalistic thing instead of being a journalistic punk.
Maybe that's why he didn't write back.
Maybe that's why I didn't get a Christmas card.
If someone had written to me, I thank you, Rudy. I can't tell you how much you made my day when you described the work of levees.org as journalistic.
Absolutely.
I can't tell you how much I appreciate that. If anyone wrote to me critically about anything I'd said and wanted more information, I would say, how much information do you need and when do you want it?
I can attest to that because I did that. When you and I made our acquaintance, I wanted to hear everything you had to say. When I had my doubts, I went right back to you and you never hesitated. You got right back to me and said, this is the information I have. This is the information that's solid. Here's where I got it. Here's where it came from. You proved you don't go to journalism school and come out and all of a sudden you're a journalist. It's like anything else. It's 10,000 hours. If you do something for 10,000 hours, then you can call yourself an expert at it. You put in the hours, and you, Karen Gadbois, I always bow down to you all because you were citizens who weren't trained as journalists, who didn't have that calling per se, but you took up the mantle, got information that no journalists had gotten. You found out things that no journalists had, and you paid attention to things that no journalists had. And you did it for all the right reasons. You did it for community. And you helped this community in such myriad ways that it's impossible to say thank you enough, because you helped keep insurance rates down. You helped people understand and not feel guilty like we did something wrong. And we didn't. Had Katrina been the result of us sinning, my God, this town would have been gone 100, 200 years ago. Let's be honest about what the truth is.
Well, thank you. I have to share something with you. I remember like it was yesterday. I was in my town of New Orleans and somebody was walking past me, cackling, laughing, trying to look and see what the laughter is. And someone I don't know was walking down the sidewalk, reading a copy of your paper, just laughing and laughing and just continued laughing all the way to the end, in the corner.
Yeah, I love those stories. I love the stories of when I hear people said they laughed, because that was the most depressing time of our lives. And it was a very difficult, it was the hardest time of our existence. And that's why I did it, to try and help our psyche a little bit.
And it was before this, we all
yes.
taken a video of it if that happened again today. But it really did happen. I remember that.
Our former mayor. So yeah, absolutely.
Anyway, I've talked way too much today.
Same here.
It's been pent up inside me for a long time. Here we are, the 20th anniversary of the levee breaches, and still our paper of record is still protecting the Corps for reasons I can't understand. It protected them years ago when I caught the Army Corps of Engineers sitting at their computers and logging on to the Advocate's website where I kept a blog and leaving vicious comments. We caught them doing it.
And a propaganda campaign against you.
And against levees.org and vicious comments. We caught them. So what did the Time-Picayune do? Jim Amos made out like levees.org and me were the problem. And when we asked to see the comments, what their response was to ridicule me and to fire the managing editor of NOLA.com, John Donnelly. He was fired. The next day, they got rid of all the software and put in new software so that the Army Corps of Engineers could never again be caught logging onto their computers and disparaging people online. So that was the response of the editors, Jim Amos and his boss, Ashton Phelps. This was 2008.
The editors that were good there were one or two, and the reporters they brought on were generally pretty good. But when you're a reporter, you're often at the disposal of an editor, and what you cover, what you can't cover. It's an interesting relationship, and it dictates what senior editors, right? Absolutely. And that's why I was so thankful when you wanted to talk about this topic, because I'll talk about journalism all day. It's near and dear to my heart. I did what I did with the levee, came down here. I was beholden to no one. I had moved here permanently a year before. It felt like it was on my shoulders to go and just tell the truth and just be bare but honest about what was happening. And I chose the medium of satire to do it. But I will talk about journalism, and I eat, breathe it. It's my life. I've been in journalism since I was in 7th grade.
I'm really glad you brought up this point, because when I say the Advocate or the Time-Picayune, reporter and every editor and every staffer and every data entry at the top.
Understood.
And at that time, when I was villainized for trying to get to the truth by Jim Amos, it's between him and me. And now it's Renee Sanchez. Now it's me and Renee Sanchez.
And that's why I feel like
I wouldn't recognize him, but I'm sure he knows who I am.
And that's why I feel like the paper is reverting instead of progressing.
Not on our watch.
We're here.
That's why we're here. I think I've used up everything I wanted to say today. This is a
Cheers.
much longer episode than usual for us. I knew this was going to happen, but we had so much material, and I'm glad we got this knocked out. Sandy, is there anything you'd like to say to our listeners before you sign off?
Ugh. I'm so pleased and flattered that you invited me to be a part of this. I appreciate it. I love that you mentioned Karen Gadbois. She interviewed me for a written article many years ago about a property that one of my clients had renovated. It was nice to hear her
Wonderful.
name.
She's a hero.
Sandy, you were a levee.org supporter from the very beginning.
Yeah. I moved here because of Katrina, the storm where my mom and dad live in Mississippi.
Hmm.
My parents had a lot of work to do. They had 11 trees down on their property and
Yes.
a lot of damage.
Understood.
Understood.
One more thing, Sandy, just real quick. If you're looking for alternatives, there's a really good website called the LA Illuminator. I think the Louisiana Illuminator is doing great work. And Greg LaRose, the editor over there, I think they're doing very good work. And so if you see a story in the Advocate, take a look at the LA Illuminator and see how they compare.
Let's not forget the New Orleans lens.
Absolutely.
New Orleans lens. It's disturbing to me how few people know about the lens.
Yeah, they were making a great name, and I think they just had some growing issues. But you're absolutely right. I wish they got a lot more attention because they deserve it. And there's Verite, and there's several different outlets out there now that are trying to do some good work. The best way you can inform yourself is to take a look. It doesn't take much time.
So I guess you would agree with me, Rudy and Sandy, that our final comment is get your news from various sources. Don't get it all.
Cheers. Or just listen to us.
On that note, how about we sign off, okay? All right. Thank you, Rudy, for being with me. Thank you, Sandy. And thank you, the listeners, for coming back to listen to yet another episode of The Slingshot from levees.org. See you next time.